Right.
Right.
And as Adam said in the comments, there's a lot of great new vocabulary words.
Yeah, right. Golgi apparatus. That's the one that sticks to me.
I'm gonna have to watch it a couple of times just to get it down. So the guys, we're gonna just give about a minute for questions to come in. Now is the time. We would love your questions, and Evan will answer them. We do have, if you go to, there's a new subscription model for the show. If you want to support the show, and I look at it as, okay, if I'm supporting the show, now I have almost like a direct expert available to me for $29 a year, where I can ask any of my plant questions. And so that's awesome of you to do. The So you can get that by going to learn.permethos.com if you want to get it right away, or tv.permethos.com. You can rewatch the show episodes, leave your comments there. And the one question that came in was the slides. So we gave away the slides from episode 1. Those are on tv.permethos.com. Now, episode 2, we just put the slides in the learn.permethos.com for the subscribers. Are you going to have those slides also available for the free tv.permethos.com show notes?
Well, I would digress to your process. I was just under the impression I was sending them to you to put them where they go. So
Okay.
I'm open to whatever you think might be best there.
All right. All right. So we'll discuss that, and we'll have an answer for everybody here within the week. And I'll send out an email to everybody who is subscribed to the or registered for the live shows. I'll send out an email to all you guys letting you know what the plan is. Okay, so first question that came in was from Adam, and Adam says, related to concrescence and other terms used by McKenna, have you heard of the concepts of stem compression, space-time, energy, and matter/mass? Relates to the singularity theorists about the direction we may be headed, and offers possible explanations to the Fermi paradox. And he's got a link in here, and I'll just type it into the chat.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. I'm looking for this image. I'm not familiar with that specifically, but check this out. This is in the book Living Energies by Victor Schauberger. And it really reconciles with what McKenna was saying, and it may have some influence in regards to what you're proposing there. But this idea that you have the Big Bang, and then you have this kind of moving out process, and you have the sun. We revolve around the sun, and if you stop there, you might imagine that we're just sitting out in space. Well, space is moving, right? Our solar system is moving within the Milky Way, and we've seen the images of the Milky Way spirals. And then the Milky Way is involved with all the other galaxies around another backbone, if you will. And all of that movement is in resonance. It's like the intricacies of a clock in some ways, right? Which is kind of an interesting analogy when you look at this picture, because you have a starting point, and in a lot of respects, that's the event horizon that we can't see back to either, that McKenna was referencing. So we move through this process of this increasing complexity, which again, keep that concept of where plants can come from, the angiosperm leap, and all of these things. The further back that we look, the less that we know. How do we reverse engineer it all? And then we move through, and you can kind of see, we're kind of right here, and what you get is a movement back towards a new beginning on the other side. So, I hold this with me in the background when I talk universally, because I should have put it in the show. It'll come up in future shows, but there's a great book that talks about the orders of magnitude of life. And you have, atomic life, cellular life, human animal life, space, galaxies, universe, right? And you have these big, almost trophic levels of life, if you will. And you can't see but one or two away. So we can't see an atom. We can postulate how it might work, but we can't get down there and look at it, right? In the same way, we can't move through a black hole. There's a restriction of our ability in our consciousness. And what we'll also talk about a little bit more in the energetic realm is how Rudolf Steiner differentiated the physical, the etheric, the astral, and the ego, or the I organization, in terms of human, plant, and animal life. You know, plants, everything has a physicality. It's kind of a precipitation of the spiritual, and it has a physical and an etheric body. And the etheric body is kind of like, you know, the frequency that prevents life from falling apart. You know, the soul, if you will. You know, and you think, you know, this ability of plants to retain the etheric and the physical. Well, animals also have an astral, an etheric, and a physical, and they have emotion, they have instinct, and they can operate with those capacities that plants don't have. And then you have humans, which have consciousness and self-reflection. So we can say I, we can look in the mirror and see ourselves. Animals can't do that, right? And you know, you could say we could train them to move towards that capacity, but it's unique to humanity, and it really gives this really nice framework to see life and how it works. So what happens is humans have extracted themselves from the whole through consciousness. Animals less so, and plants are still completely immersed within the natural rhythm, which is why they're influenced by the celestial cycles, like planning calendars, things of that nature. So, you know, when you kind of, again, when you flesh this stuff out in this way and allow yourself more of a mindset towards the spiritual and the energetic and the things that we can't measure and see, and don't imagine that we're just the sum of our parts. You know, that's what biodynamic agriculture is. That's what Steiner was lecturing about, was how to influence the etheric body of plants. The 99.9% of matter is space. So he was affecting the space, not the physicality. Think about that atom. It's an electron cloud. 99% of its volume. So maybe a little bit of a long-winded answer, but that's what came to my mind there. I want to check out what he's got there as well.
Yeah. Oh, and Adam says that actually looks very much like a concept from Barbara Marx Hubbard.
I'm not familiar with her too. Very
I was
cool.
thinking, is that L. Ron Hubbard's wife?
Sounds like it.
Okay. Lee's got three questions.
Cool.
So first question is, could you say more about Archaea? What do they do more exactly?
Yeah. Man, what do they do? Well, it's a funny story. I discovered Archaea through this guy named Guy. I mean, his name's really Guy. I always think that's a trip. But he lives in Texas, and he was connected to Oppenheimer, not the nuclear bomb Oppenheimer, but his brother. And turns out his brother was a renowned scientist as well, spent his career and was bastardized in a lot of ways because of his focus on Archaea. But he was a kind of an intellectual academia that tried to push Archaea, its relevance and use, through official circles back in the 70s, because it proved to clean up oil spills in places of contamination. And interestingly, you know, I'll put this in the show notes, the story about the farmer that I was telling you about, but if you put humus, sea minerals, and kelp together and essentially brew them and through the process he had, but what hit me was that's exactly the recipe we put together in compost tea. So this has a lot of personal influence to me, because I didn't have any knowledge of this, and here I was 10 years later reading the story about how this guy put these things together, and it just blew my mind. But what he was doing was creating an environment to cultivate the Archaea. And the reason that we didn't know that they existed, which again is laughable, it's like, you know, the oil spill in the Gulf, and we find new forms of bacteria that are eating it. Well, they were always there, right? But the Archaea, you can't isolate them in a petri dish. They have very specific needs for an environment that can't be cultured artificially. So there was no way to grow them out in the lab to study them. They also a lot of them are RNA based. They're kind of like, they predate bacteria. So we didn't have the capacity to look for them. And the way in which they were capturing the organisms that we can look for are through sieves, basically a filtration, a physical filtration. And the porosity of the sieves that they were using wasn't small enough to catch them. I mean, it's really as simple as that. So it came down to this guy in his lab, like, I wonder what would happen if I looked for something that you can't see through a microscope, but that might be there. And he caught it and isolated an unknown piece of genetic material, and voila, we discover Archaea. So there's several outfits that have learned the culture process, and you can buy it on the market. As far as, you know, my level of understanding, the best thing that I could offer, what sticks with me when your question comes up is the idea of the Archaea, and this is as it's described to me by Guy, that it eats ions. You may have heard of electrical organisms. I post that on our Microbe Makers Facebook page a lot when I come across it. But there's organisms that survive off of electricity alone. So Archaea is kind of in that capacity. And so they don't, like if you offered it molasses or like the leaves in a forest, it's not going to be munching on the physical organic matter to chemically break it down with enzymes. It's going to take the remnants of that process and think isotopes, right? And I don't know if you ever heard of Ormus. It's kind of a rabbit hole, and we'll talk about it just because it's fun. But it's like Ormus is orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. You can look it up online and have a field day. Good luck trying to figure it out, because there's a lot of smart people have been trying to figure it out. But essentially what it is a different form of matter. And when you get down into how we tell ourselves what exists, we have to rely on our ability to see it or measure it, right? So if we can't see it or measure it, therefore we tell ourselves it doesn't exist, doesn't reach the textbook, but it's all there. I mean, you kind of hear me talk about that in a lot of different ways. So, what Ormus is, to finish that point, is you have this orbitally rearranged monoatomic element, metals, and they're in the metal family, and they don't express metallic properties unless there's more than one ion there. So what it's doing is basically, the best way I can describe it is it's like a figure skater pulling her arms in and spinning faster. And we build the spectrometers that shoot a laser through matter, and the way in which that spectrometer changes the angles of the laser that we've driven through it, we've got a database that says this is gold or this is yttrium or whatever it is. That's how we tell ourselves what's real. So when you shoot this Ormus material with the laser, it comes out, well, there's nothing there because we haven't had an ability to catalog it, and therefore nobody can study it, and we're stuck in this rut of not having an ability to articulate it. So Archaea is a little bit the same way. It's because our lab-based conditions and how we study truth and science aren't conducive to culturing this organism, either from a physical size standpoint or from the reality that it can't survive on its own without the ecosystem there, for example. We've just basically said that they haven't existed. So do a little poking around. I think it was literally within the last year where we recalibrated the tree of life for this new discovery, and it's really an example of how little we do know relative to all the things that we do.
It sounds like dark matter, which isn't actually matter at all, right?
Right. Yeah. Like I think Wilhelm Reich would call it orgon,
Yeah.
chi or prana, or all of these kind of mythical things that are, basically the absence of knowing. Can we put a word on it? And that disturbs a lot of people that have decided that we can know everything, right? So it's like, again, the more comfortable we can be with not knowing, the more we know. I think is a fair way of kind of wrapping that up. But yeah, same kind of concept.
Or we'll get there eventually. There's
I like that spirit.
Yeah. All right. So Lee's next question is: are Archaea ambiguous, or are they mostly found in certain environments?
Oh, they are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And they, I didn't really intend to draw a parallel with Ormus, but it's the same kind of thing. You can concentrate them, but they're everywhere. It's kind of, Ormus is kind of a bridge to the spiritual, and Archaea is kind of a bridge to the biological. It's that last step in the process of the breaking down before the building up. So they are everywhere. But again, there's really not a whole lot known about them. I mean, if I say to you, we know 5% of the bacteria species that exist based on how fast we're discovering them, and we just discovered Archaea last year, we just don't know. It's kind of a new realm of science, if you will.
It's like, you've heard of, there's like this psychedelic drug. It's DMT, I can't even remember how it's
ayahuasca.
Yeah, it's an ayahuasca is how it's extracted. So DMT, the way people do that is they like smoke it. You can't digest it. But ayahuasca is a digestible form. It's like the only way you can digest DMT.
Right.
But what's interesting about that drug is that it's in everything. It's in every plant already.
It's the only one produced by the human body, right? And it's most prevalent at birth and at death.
Right.
Kind of fascinating, right? And yeah, Yeah, I've done a lot of research on that, and you're right. You can smoke it, and it'll like shoot you through the moon for like a minute or something. But if you take the ayahuasca, you take it with the ayahuasca plant with what's called an MAO inhibitor, and it's another plant that allows the expression of the molecule in the body. So you don't just
Basically,
pass.
it allows your liver to process it, right?
Yeah,
Otherwise
yeah. It allows it to stick, if you will, and that comes from shamans in a forest that had no inclination as to what was the right thing to put together. It's kind of like biodynamics in a parallel. It's like what we all used to do because we didn't have an ability to do it differently. This era that we are kind of at the end of, in my opinion, is us kind of screwing it all up. And now what we're all talking about is how do we get back to that in consciousness? That's an interesting parallel to what I'm going to try to get across here over time is we can choose to think about these things differently. And then we can seek out, different aspects of nature to prove that to us. And that proof is a singular thing. It allows you to be your own expert in that respect. And that's a lot of what I hope people get out of this information over time is, you can know these things in a way that the experts don't even know. And it's really empowering, especially when you can see it work.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in that, the DMT side, the reason I even brought it up is I just watched this documentary. It's on Netflix, and it's called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And this seems to fall right in line there.
Yeah. You got it.
All right. So Lee's next question is, are archaea easily destroyed by fertilizers and pesticides like bacteria and fungi?
I'll digress to not knowing for sure, but I'm going to take an educated stab at that and say, yeah. I think it's, if you remember when we were talking today in the session about, being able to genetically modify crops to spray poisons on them, or, spraying a selective herbicide that kills the dicot and not the monocot. Those are technologies and of convenience, right? What Charles Walters called toxic rescue chemistry. So, what we don't, your question says you fully understand it, right? It's that the influence of the toxic rescue chemistry approach is pervasive. It affects everything, even if it doesn't kill the target crop that you're trying to grow. It's stressing it. It'd be like taking antibiotics all day just to do it. It's not going to kill you directly, maybe over time. But it's safe to say that, in the kind of inextricable tangle of nature, and the web of life and how it all relies on itself, that, yeah, there is some negative influence. And I would say even more so because it can't be cultured in a lab. I mean, that's one of the things in the biological conversation. If you go into a garden center and you can read the microbes contained in a product, know right from the get-go that it's extremely limited, because those organisms have been identified by humans to be beneficial and cultured in a lab and grown up without any competition, with no predators, abundant food sources. They're fat and happy and lazy. And it doesn't make them negative in any way. I don't want to paint that picture. They're still, especially if you haven't grown biologically in the past, there's very beneficial applications for singular organism approaches. But you're not working with the power of the ecosystem. And that's one of the things that is about Archaea, which is why it was so long and so misunderstood for so long, is because it can't live isolated on its own. So you got to imagine, if what we're doing is affecting the organisms that we can measure, that whatever's kind of filling the gaps and beyond our view is absolutely being affected negatively.
Wow. Adam Hicks just had a quick comment on, earlier we were talking that Barbara Marx Hubbard.
Yeah.
He says, definitely not L. Ron Hubbard related. She was more aligned with Buckmeister Fuller.
Bucky Fuller. Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So barbaramarxhubbard.com, and then there's, I guess you could just go there, but /global-communication-hub is the URL he is directing us towards. So yeah, we'll check that out, Adam.
How do I look at that conversation in the notes afterwards? Can I find that?
I can send it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any way to just go find it after a show? Just curious. Like if somebody out there wanted to see that next week, does it live?
Like the chat notes?
Yeah.
Well, most of the chat happens on Facebook,
Okay.
However, the folks joining live, that chat, I can include it in the show notes of every episode.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean,
Absolutely, we can do
yeah,
that.
no, I'd like to follow those threads. That's, again, that's one of the coolest things about this, man. We definitely got a hip crowd. If you're talking Bucky Fuller out there, he's one of my favorite quotes is, don't try to change the system, introduce a new one that makes the old one obsolete. That's like a mantra of mine. And that's Bucky Fuller. So kudos to that.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. Oh, we got one more question. All right. We're going to take this one last question, guys, and then we're going to call it a day. Once again, learn.permaethos.com if you want to just help out the show right away, $29 a year, or tv.permaethos.com. That's where you can get every episode. You can watch every episode. You get the show notes and all of that. And then it's got ways to support the show listed in there under each episode. Last question from Lee says, with regard to culturing Archaea on petri dishes, Elaine Ingram notes that most bacteria can only be cultivated in limited environments so that a given petri dish nutrient formulation will only allow a very limited number of species at a time. Different nutrient formulations will support different, and then it cuts off.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have a lot of respect for Elaine Ingham and her work. She is of the school that is very analytical. It's great to hear that anecdote. I haven't heard her discuss that in much detail to the level of your comment there, but I mean, she would know as well as anyone that you can't culture life in a petri dish. It'd be like trying to make the ocean out of a lake. Good luck, right? There's a magic in there that you can't really mess with, and you can't reverse engineer. So yeah, I mean, that concept of culturing life is kind of what brought us to where we are. I don't think it can get us to where we need to go, and it's going to be great when we start going there to have all of these faculties that we've developed. I mean, quick aside on this topic, the BT organism, most people are in agriculture have heard of Bacillus thuringiensis. It's an organism that you can spray that works well in the larval stages of insects. And it was actually discovered in the gut of a moth in a cave in Brazil in the 70s. Crazy story. But and how that happened, I have no idea. But essentially, we had worked with the organism. We recognized that basically if you spray it on a crop and the caterpillar eats the leaf and it eats the bacteria, it grows from the inside of the caterpillar and kills it. And it's totally organic. Doesn't reside naturally in soil, so it's been commoditized in that regard. It's also been genetically engineered into crops to express this trait, which is taking it a little too far in my opinion. But the reason I bring it up is it's really good positive correlation to human ingenuity. There's actually, if you ever seen those little mosquito dunks, you put in standing water and they produce a BT organism. It's an Israelensis strain. And it floats to the top, and when the larvae of the mosquito comes up to breathe, the bacteria parasitizes it. And it's also sold as a Kerstaki strain for foliar application. So the point being, that's the same BT organism, kind of like you and me, right? And we're all people, but we express ourselves in different ways. We have different abilities. I always say, what if somebody was looking at us through a microscope and you're the best soccer player on earth and I'm, a trumpet player? How do you know? Right? I mean, in that idea of, the ability of organisms really can't be articulated. But in this instance with the BT organism, we definitely noticed a greater ability of the Israelensis strain to operate in water and the Kerstaki strain to be able to operate on a leaf surface. So it's not that we can't figure certain things out, but take that little anecdote for one organism and apply it just intellectually across the breadth of life, and just imagine how much work we'd need to do. It's kind of mind-blowing. So I don't want to paint the picture that biological products in a garden center that are limited are bad. In a lot of cases, they have been concentrated to a level outside of the balance that nature would be able to produce on her own that have great functional benefit. The idea is not just to rely on, there's a disease, there's a Bacillus populi is it Bacillus subtilis. Sorry, it's a bacteria that's a product called Serenade we used to sell in our garden store. And it worked great as a fungicide. You got the fungal outbreak on your plant, you spray it down with this bacteria, and the bacteria eats the fungi and gets rid of the disease. Well, that bacteria resides in soil, in the ecosystem naturally. Just happens to be that most people have either killed their soil or developed their property, and it's not there in the right balance. So here they come, they see the disease, they go and kill it. But they didn't inoculate the organism into the ecosystem. So that every single year when the conditions are right, here comes the fungal outbreak, there goes the disease, and we're in this cycle. Whereas if we just brewed up some tea and distributed it around our landscape consistently for a season, and that bacteria lives in the ecosystem, then the fungus can't ever come and rear its head, right? So it's not that it's a movement in the right direction, it's not toxic, but the mindset of what the potential is in terms of setting the ecosystem up is restrictive relative to what it could be.
Yeah, it's a Band-Aid, right? You're just applying a Band-Aid to create the environment temporarily, right. And hopefully, and the goal is to create that environment permanently, so you don't need the Band-Aid anymore.
Bingo. That's it.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm excited for next week. Guys, tv.permaethos.com. You can subscribe to the newsletter. We'll be sending out some emails here in the coming weeks, and to give you more information on what's going on and what's happening with new content and things that Evan's doing. Awesome.
Well, thanks, everybody. tv.permaethos.com. Support the show and use me. That's why I'm here. So see y'all next week.